All right, we are back with another PCBH Corner, and actually, the first corner of 2024. And if it looks different in here, it's because it is. It's a little bit of a makeshift situation. We're in Airbnb in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And what you can't see, which is hilarious, is that the stand that we're using is a selfie stick propped up in between cushions, supported by a journal that's not ours, a book bag, and a toaster.
And a toaster. It is, and so if the camera falls at any time, we'll try to pick it back up and put it together real quick. But yeah, it is. Maybe we'll take a picture and even send that out in the email about what the makeshift camera stand was.
But the cool thing is looking into the view, it looks like
it doesn't look bad.
Yeah,
good backdrop. Yeah.
Speaking of which, should we? Do you do the thing where you put it on me so it doesn't move?
I know. Well, let me try.
Or is that too? No.
I know. That's what I was thinking. Maybe
okay.
Not. Yeah, we'll just go. If it's going in and out, we apologize.
Yeah. If it's a smidge blurry, it's not that it's blurry. It's just kind of we'll refocus and refocus. We definitely apologize. But the reason why we wanted to get this corner made and get this corner out there is because we just did a huge CHCW metric and data dump summarizing 2023.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really awesome how you've been able to use previous year's data dumps and then the questions that then come from it.
Yes.
To now make that email so detailed, which we do apologize, it's long.
It is a long email. It is a long, and it's actually long before you even get to the data too. It's almost like, is this ever gonna happen? Like, is this data ever gonna actually come?
We just tease you. It's like one of those
really
things.
is. It's like, see you next week or something like that. Yeah.
It's like one of those like websites you go to and you keep scrolling down and it just takes you forever.
And as you said, though, the reason why we have done that kind of almost like a preface at the beginning of the data dump is because a lot of the questions that we would get from people after just us putting out the data. A lot of times we would just put out the data of just the numbers and say, hey, this is what it is. And then we'd get a lot of emails about like, well, what's a visit? Like, how do you quantify what a visit is or qualify what a visit is? What's a handoff? What does that look? What are your ratios? What system do you work in? Do you work at a CHC? Are you in a primary care office solely? What's your ratio of PCPs to BHCs? And that kind of led us to a lot of times evolving this email to include all that data to provide as much context as possible when reporting out the numbers.
Well, this sets up my question that I have for you perfectly. So what advice do you have for folks out there who are reading your email on the listserv that describes the system, and then I know you put links into our other PCBH corners as we define things such as what is a visit. And then as you kind of go all the way through and provide the metrics, I guess, what advice would you have for somebody reading that? Like, what do you want them to take away from this?
That's a great question. I think the one thing, honestly, the one big thing that the reason why we put this out there is to encourage other people to be vulnerable and put your data out there. You know, when we talk to people that are doing incredible research, like Jennifer Funderburg or Jody Plaha, or people that are researching PCBH, one of the things, and I was a part of the one article that looked at all the research that was related to PCBH, one of the hardest things that we came up with, there was no data whatsoever about fidelity to the model. And particularly about like, hey, we say we are trying to see this number of visits per day.
Are we actually
doing it? We're saying we're trying to see all these different conditions. Are we actually doing that? Say you're doing all these handoffs. Are you actually doing that? You know, so I think it's one of the things about better for our field is rather us holding on to this data that we probably have within these health systems, and particularly like clinical health systems, not AMCs by that means, but just starting to send this data out to have this free-flowing change and of data, and it's like, okay, that's cool, that's the metric. I'm not seeing that, and then being able to, so that was the original prompt. So the hope, first of all, if someone who's reading that, send your data out, you know, and just take a risk to see how that goes. I think the other thing that would come up is, when we were joking about this before, is I think there's too much of healthcare centers doing the thing like, hey, we're unique, we're special. And I still remember Studer Group, when they came and consulted with us and said, yeah, health systems like to say they're unique and special.
What do they call it? They called it perennially unique, or
something
there
like
was
that.
Some type of word.
Yeah. That, and basically
pervasively unique.
The basically idea is that when anybody talks about an intervention or something to try, it's like, oh, that wouldn't work here
because of this. Or this wouldn't work because of that.
And what they have found through, and what I think we have found through our consulting, is that, yeah, there's unique factors within a health system, and there is more that are same or similar than there are that are different.
Okay.
That being said, I do think also when you look at our data, it's really important, as you were saying, to go through those videos that we put into the links and read some of the context, because it might not be realistic at this time to have these set as benchmarks. And I wouldn't even say that they should be set as benchmarks. And, the reason why we use the data and the expectations we have is that we've had years of data to inform us about what our benchmarks should be. This shouldn't just be applied indiscriminately at another health system. So I would say, if you're reading it, hopefully this prompts you to maybe share your data. Second thing would be, hey, what could be some takeaways and what are some differences between our systems to make the data relevant or less relevant? And then I would also say it's another prompt for places, get to know your IT people and your analytic people to get this data.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, where was your mind going?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, if you're brand new, maybe you're a new director and you've walked into kind of a previously established integrated behavioral health department, but maybe it was kind of a half-baked situation, and now you're brand new in it, and you're looking at the reports that you're provided, and it doesn't match like what you have in the email of the sense of like, well, I don't have access to how many visits per day. I don't have access to how many warm handoffs. I don't have access to unique patients, which I think was going to go into what you were going to say next about becoming really good friends with your IT team as well as your data analysts. So yeah, walk me through a little bit about that.
Yeah, and then remind me to come back and ask you a question about, how have you really tried to lead CHCW with the mission and the values to promote metrics that reflect values, because I want to come back to that because I think that's a really important thing too. So I think the most important thing as far as like data being put out is, one, it has to be accurate. Like, it has to be accurate, and not only for when we're putting it out to research or we're putting it out to a listserv, that's true and stuff, but the truth of the matter is, like, we use this data a lot of times just for our own program, as far as like, are we hitting guardrails? Are we doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, giving feedback to the team? If the data is not accurate, no one's going to buy into it. No one's going to actually be able to see it. So I think when you're working with your IT team, really coming up and doing the accusation audit of what could be going wrong here, and asking your team, do you think this data is accurate? Do you think these are the number of visits that you're having? Do you think this is being divided up by how much clinic you're working? Making sure that any data and metric that you're working with the team on, make sure it's accurate with the IT team and the analytic team. And then I would also say, and this will go into the question for you, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. So when I say that, and especially about data, where does your mind go? Is about like the importance of keeping it simple and making sure the data that we're tracking not only is simple, but it's reflecting what we want it to reflect.
Well, I think that's tough, because I think if you just kind of do a glance at your email, you might not automatically think that it's all that simple. So, but once you start breaking it down, you recognize that we're not tracking certain things that other organizations are tracking. And we are not saying we're the authority on this.
Right.
I'm not saying that I'm right. But I know that a lot of organizations, they want to track everything. They want to track how long each visit is. They want to track which days have the most warm handoffs. They want to track, I'm trying to think of a couple.
Curbside consults.
Oh, well, yeah, we haven't even gotten me started on that part.
Yeah.
I want to be careful with how I say it, because I do understand that when we've talked with other systems, or we've just kind of seen other systems, or they've presented, there was a context for why they were tracking certain data. So I don't want to come at it from like a judgmental situation. But in our world, we don't track anything that would be seen as just like regular operation. So we're not going to track curbside consultations.
Because that's a regular operation.
Yeah, I'm not going to track meet and greets, because I don't think that there's any evidence that there's value of a meet and greet. I'm not going to talk about every time that there's an interaction where the BHC informs a PCP's treatment plan. Like,
it would almost be an impossible thing to track to begin with, because it happens so frequently.
Exactly. So then if we took a warm handoff and then we came back around and we said, hey, here's what's going on, here's what I think, we're not going to go then track that and say like, hey, I had 3 warm handoffs where I saw the patient, and then I also had 3 PCP recommendations back after I saw the patient, and then I had 1 curbside consultation about a patient I didn't end up seeing, and then I talked to the nurse about somebody who called in. We're not going to count that.
You could see how just expansive these data tracking, and it goes back to, and I think you've done such a good job with CHCW, which makes our data tracking so much easier, is that there is a clear mission and value about what we're trying to do. And that's primary care, that's PCBH, we are unapologetic about that. And what's really great is that when we have such a clear mission defined and that's sent out to the team, it also makes data tracking clearer. It also makes it easier to be like, what should we track? You know, if we're saying that we're part of primary care and our goal is to provide accessible, compassionate, and contextual health care in the moment when it's needed, that's team-based, it's like, oh, we can start to make some data now about that. We can start to pull some metrics that are coming from those.
And then, you know, I know we're getting real into rabbit holes here, and I apologize if any
rabbit holes are fun sometimes. Let us know if they're not.
Is it completely clear? There are certain things that we track, but we don't necessarily always report out to the team on a regular basis. So I guess I want to make that distinction, because I was thinking about the referral problem. We absolutely track that. But at the monthly meeting, we don't then bring that up. That's something that we monitor behind the scenes. We actually did a presentation at CFHA on it.
Yeah.
That's something that we monitor behind the scenes. And then we keep track of initials and follow-ups.
Yeah.
That's something that we used to present out to the team that we've now stopped presenting out to the team, but we do monitor it behind the scenes. And I think the reason why is exactly what you're saying. With the keep it simple, silly, so the KISS method, and keeping the main thing,
Amen.
You can get so inundated with every last bit of information. And again, I'm not saying not to have the system track it or to have the EHR track it in a certain way. I'm just saying that that's not necessarily the information that you want to share out on a monthly basis. So when we say we keep it simple, we keep it simple. I mean, truly. Visits per day, warm handoffs per day, unique patients. From a clinical standpoint, is there anything else that we're tracking, and not just tracking, but talking about on a monthly basis?
No, and within the unique patients would be the penetration rate that's continuing to be there. Yeah, outside of like clinical indicators, no.
Yeah, like we don't, at the monthly meeting, we don't bring up and say, hey, there's this many PCP recommendations that were sent.
No.
We don't say this was the referral problem list.
And can I ask you this, you know, and I think I know where my mind predicts where your mind's gonna go, but I wanna make sure. Because I know sometimes I think people's response could be like, well, why does it matter if you average 9 visits a day? Like, why does that matter? You know, the first thing I think a lot of people's minds go to when they hear that is that it's a financial thing. Like, that is the reason why. And as we've always said, let's be real about it. For sure, there is a part of it being financial. Like, it's secondary though. That is not the primary reason why we're reporting out. As almost like I remember Patty Robinson saying this about what's the best indicator, and then they even had that one, Matt Martin had that one a Delphi study about what is the primary, and it was visits per day. Why do you think that is? Why is visits per day something that it's like, hey, we're gonna unapologetically track this and report out on this metric?
I know all the arguments against it.
Yeah.
And we're getting bolder and bolder in these.
Let's do it.
Like, I haven't seen a system that functions well that does not track the how many at the baseline of like seeing patients. Mm-hmm. And why, for me as a director, when I'm going through and looking at our new BHCs when they're being onboarded and as they're going through from month 3 to month 6 to month 9 to month 12 to 18 months to they're there for 2 years or 3 years, I'm looking at productivity, because that is a shortcut for, do patients find their services to be valuable?
I love it.
Does the team find their services to be valuable? Because if they do, I feel so certain, like I feel a certain way about saying this, but if you are a BHC and you have dedicated yourself to being available for the team and meeting the needs of the patients in a system that is mature, where some of these core processes are done, where like a handoff is put on your schedule, you should have no problem averaging that amount, because if you're useful, people can't get enough of you.
It's such a great... No. I don't think... You know what's so interesting?
You don't take that away?
I don't take that away. Let us know if people do. I don't take it a certain way, because I do agree completely with you. It is a reflection of visits per day. Now, of course, not just in a vacuum, because anybody could just have a lot of visits per day with only a few select amount of people. That's probably a low probability, though, that would happen. The reality is, as you said, if the service is not helpful to the patient or the team, visits per day is going to go down.
Yeah.
Like it just will. And it's the same thing as far as like handoffs and unique people. Like when you start to really think about what visits per day reflects, it reflects that the system's uptaking and patients are finding it useful.
And then from there, I think you wrote this in one of the emails that we were just going over, you're not going to just look at one metric in a vacuum.
Right.
And so now, if we are going to look at one metric in a vacuum, the one metric I recommend in that vacuum to look for is visits per day.
Because, as you said, it goes through all these different things. It reflects all these different things just naturally. Yeah,
right.
Well said.
Now,
well said.
if you can mix that number with the warm handoff per day number, and then you can mix that with the unique patients to look at your penetration rate and how many different, both of those. If you can look at both of those numbers, it then tells, like you had written out, it tells a story. So you start there. So you're looking at visits per day. And then if the handoffs are a little bit low, then we start talking with the BHC about, hey, well, maybe, what's going on here, or like, how are the length of your visits? So you kind of like, you start there and then you like problem solve down from there. And then if you have data that shows that the person is seeing lots of unique patients, which for a full-time clinician, 500 plus, I mean, that's a ballpark throwing that out there. If somebody's 500 unique patients plus, then it's a pretty compelling story that they're seeing folks, patients are finding them to be helpful, the team is finding them to be helpful. If their warm handoff numbers are pretty decent, then they're decently available and accessible to the team. And then if they have a lot of unique patients, that means that they're having a big reach. And you tell me, as a BHC, if you have a BHC in your system, I mean, if you go back to Gather and the 4 Cs, what are we trying to do?
It's so interesting that if you do just take those 3 data metrics, visits per day, handoffs per day, and any type of unique or penetration rate, if you take those 3 and they're hitting, and again, what's interesting is like it's not like we have benchmarks or things like that, but they're growing, let's say, they continue to increase. The ironic thing is, like, I would still absolutely track PCP satisfaction. I would still absolutely track patient engagement.
Absolutely.
I would still...
employee engagement.
And employee engagement. I'd absolutely track all those 3. And they probably almost are a little bit, like when we talk about the variance of the pie that's being taken up, the variance of the pie is being taken up the most by visits per day, handoffs per day, and penetration rate. When you start to have those things be where you want them to be and to continue to grow, it reflects that PCPs are satisfied. It reflects patients are engaged. It reflects that you have engaged BHCs. Now again, I would still track those last 3, and I think they're very important things to track and always to be paying attention to. The truth of the matter is, if we were keeping it completely simple, and maybe that's a good thing for people watching this video, because I hear a lot of times, like, where do we start? What metrics should we start with? And as you're saying, I would start with visits per day, followed by handoffs, followed by, I'm actually might even put unique patients above handoffs.
Ooh.
I don't, my mind actually didn't like that, but I don't know. It would be interesting. I think handoffs and unique patients mirror and come hand in hand with one another.
Yeah, I feel like you said that all really well, and then it's supplemented by the patient satisfaction, the provider satisfaction, like the medical provider satisfaction, and then the employee engagement. So it kind of rounds it out. I have kind of a question that I think might take us on a smidge of a rabbit hole,
Let's do
but
it.
I feel it's a rabbit hole that is important.
Let's do it.
Okay. So a lot of systems, when they see our data, nice mature program like CHCW, they see our data.
And can I pause you on that? We really, as people are watching this, and we get answer, we get questions all the time. This is a common question. Make sure you remember where your question's going. Is like, hey, is this the right number? Like, should it be more? Should it be less? And the truth of the matter is, we don't know. We don't know what the visits per day should be at. We don't know what the handoffs per day should be at. We have now almost a decade of data to inform us at CHCW what we think those things should be. There is no benchmark though. There's guesses, there's indications, and I think it's always one of the things, is it matching your value? Is it growing? Is it evolving the way primary care does? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I honestly don't remember what I was going to ask.
No. You said you were going to say something. It was going to be a little bit of a rabbit hole. It was going to be a smidge off course that we were going to.
Oh, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
I got it.
That's, give it time.
With the handoff. Well, I got to come back to that question, but I did want to jump off of the thing that you had just
Make sure you know what that question is.
I know it might take me a second, so you might have to pause.
Yeah.
So you said that, like, you know, that there is no benchmark, and as much as I do agree with that, from there wasn't a randomized controlled trial that was done. I agree with that. But there are certain metrics that make a program financially viable. And so you know how you were saying in the beginning, when I start looking at the numbers, why do I look at the way that they do, and that the financials should be secondary? And they absolutely, in my mind, should be secondary, because the way I think as a director is, if we are supporting our BHC to be able to do the work that they want to do, the financials will follow. So you do the right things and the financials will follow. And turns out that number is kind of clear.
Yeah.
It's about 32 visits per week.
Yeah.
So for folks that are doing the 80% clinical time, that's about 8 patients a day. For the folks that are doing 100% clinical time, then you can have a little bit, so 7 times 5 is 35. Right. So you can have more like 6.5 or 7.
And I'm very glad that you did say that. And I would also say this, as we did in that one video, that, definitely go back and check out the video. What was it? Visits per day. This is how many visits per day a BHC should be.
Yeah. Yes.
Is whenever someone asks me what the visits per day should be, my mind always says, and I know this sounds bad, more.
Yeah.
It should be more.
Yeah.
Because that's a value reflected in primary care. As we talked about, like our average visits per day, you and I were averaging about 12 visits per day when we're in clinic. And I don't think that's the right number. I think that should probably increase as primary care begins to increase. I think that should probably grow and
not to freak anybody out, we're in clinic about 35% of the time.
As we like to say, we're little house cats a lot of times. But that's where I think it's an important thing to always come back to. It's like there's not a finite amount of things like for visits. When you're talking about 100% finances and all this stuff, it seems like if you're working a full week, 32 visits in that week should be what it is. Okay,
back to the rabbit hole that I had forgotten.
There we go.
And remembered. And now I've forgotten. I'm kidding.
I know. I was like, is this time?
No, I got it. But it does jump off, because you beat me to it. It does jump off from the point that you're making about, like, we don't know the right answer. So again, CHCW, nice mature system like ours, we send out the data. Inevitably, the number one question that we get back is, wow, your handoffs seem a little bit low. So the team averages, was it 2.8 for the...
2.8 for the, so just shade under 3 for the day that a BHC will have.
So 3 warm handoffs per day. And people are like, like the books say 50-50 and blah, 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 blah. And you all, as a mature system, are at 3. So that's a very nuanced conversation. And I know that for you and I, that 3 doesn't bother me one bit. That 3, I'm like, man, we're killing it. Like, do you know how hard it is to average, and again, our warm handoffs are visits. They're not meet and greets. Do you know how hard it is to have every single BHC on your team seeing 3 on-demand patients conjured up by the team? There might be a walk in here or there, but almost always
it's a handoff. I think, make sure, because it seems like you're continuing to go, the one thing my mind goes to, 100%. I've written about this a bunch. We've talked about this a lot, how improbable handoffs are. With each BHC averaging 3 handoffs per day. That has rippled out to our team averaging about 23 to 25 handoffs a day as a team. When you think about the improbability of all those 25 moments happening, yeah, I don't have a problem with that number at all. And you know, I don't know if you were going to get to this. And also, if you start to include the scheduled same day PCP visits, it does actually start to bump up a little bit more to 50-50.
Doesn't it shake out to be like 60-40 or 45-55?
What's super interesting about it, when we looked at this data, and we don't know what this means, before COVID, it was direct 50-50.
Really?
50% were co-occurring with a medical visit, either via handoff or a pre-scheduled visit. 50% was just a BHC seeing a patient that was scheduled with them, nothing with the medical. COVID tanked that number for obvious reasons. Since coming back from COVID and we've expanded our team, the total numbers of handoffs have gone up without question. Just the percent has not matched the growth, that it's been, as you said, more like a 60-40. 40% are happening co-occurring with a PCP visit, either via handoff or a pre-arranged schedule, and 60% is happening just the BHC is seeing the patient by themselves.
So all the stuff I'm about to say might be controversial.
Oh.
We'll see. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to come out. See what happens.
I feel like we just got back from New York as well, visited family. I feel like that was a New Yorker response.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
But every system wants a lot of warm handoffs. They think that warm handoffs are inherently good. I mean, as do I. What's better than having somebody on demand who was like, sure, I'll see a BHC. That's great. However, if you don't have enough BHC, so I guess may I ever beat myself to the punch here?
I love that you set it up for something.
I know, I was going to set it up, and it's like, the biggest issue most of the time is that systems don't have enough BHCs.
Amen.
And then they blame it on like not having enough handoffs, or we want more warm handoffs. But the problem is, if you ask for more warm handoffs, so say you have 1 or 2 BHCs and your ratio is 1 to 5. So we're going to imagine a system that has about 10 medical providers and about 2 BHCs. So it's a 1 to 5 ratio. And you want them to do warm handoffs. So they do, right? They're coming out, they're killing it. And you block all these slots for warm handoffs. Well, remember, they're useful to the teammate and they're useful to the patients. So they become in high demand. So they get all these warm handoffs. Well, guess what? People want to see them back. Now, we do know that that's not the most common scenario, but if you see enough people, enough people are going to want to come back.
That's a brilliant thing to say, because you said that number before, like say someone that's full-time BHC working like 70% clinical sees about 500 unique patients. Patients. Say half of them are one and dones. And not in a bad way, in a way that they got a visit, went well, they did not need to come back. It reflected what the mode number is for all traditional mental health. That still leaves 250 patients.
Yeah.
They're going to want to come back.
Yeah.
To check back in.
Yeah, and it might be coming back for 2, 3, 4 visits.
Correct.
Or it could be more. And even if you look at some of what Robinson and Ryder had written in their book about, hey, maybe about 10% of your folks might be a little bit longer term.
Correct.
So if you just did some basic math,
that's funny. Yeah.
Sorry, we have an inside joke about basic math. Yeah. That's a whole other thing.
We'll have to send it to Jack. Yeah.
That means that there's 50. So 5%. Am I doing my math right?
Yeah, 5% of 250. Well, 5% of
500
right,
is 50.
Yeah. So 50% of those people that you're meeting, they might come back a little bit more often.
50%?
Or 50 people, sorry.
50 people might come back.
Yeah.
So again, you're a BHC, you're seeing 500 unique, maybe 250 are one and done, and that matches with the data for whatever reason. Then you're leaving 250 people. Some of them are going to be long time. That's even if it was just 5%.
Correct.
Not even 10%, just even 5%. Actually, I'm doing my math wrong.
No, you were right.
Because 5% of 500 is 25.
Yeah.
I think I said 50.
But you said 10% of 50.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, 5 to 10% is going to leave you anywhere between 25 and 50 patients who are going to come back regularly.
Right.
And then that leaves, say, another 200, 250 minus the 50, another 200 that are coming back for maybe 2, 3. Okay, so I swear, if you're with us, audience, Still.
Basic math. We should have in the background like the math things going on.
Well, it's funny because I was like I think I said the wrong numbers, but I was thinking the right numbers in my head. And then
I actually think you said the right number.
Okay,
yeah,
well, whatever.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Whatever. There's a reason why we're psychologists, and not a mathematician here. But say that all happens. This is where it comes down to that the BHC thinks that they're doing something wrong. They say, I'm not doing PCBH because I have too many scheduled visits. But you are doing PCBH because, again, we look at the numbers.
We just ran the numbers.
Here, but people need to come back. So then what happens? We block all the slots. And so there's only a few coveted scheduled slots. So of course those get filled up right away. And then the BHC is so overwhelmed with the amount of folks that are coming in that they start getting frustrated and they start sending people to specialty mental health.
Correct.
And this is where the whole system breaks down.
Literally comes crumbling and implodes.
Because I was going to get to that. I mean, that alone. But PCPs need BHCs to help them in situations where they struggle. And if we are saying, sorry, we can't help you with those patients, we need to refer them out, they're going to stop utilizing
us. It all comes, it like builds off of each other.
So there's nowhere so again, if you're all blocked for handoffs all the time, there's nobody and nowhere for these folks to come back to. BHC feels overwhelmed by this situation. They send more people out to specialty mental health. They refer out. And then the PCP is like, I could have referred them out. Why?
Patient who liked the BHC on the first visit now is being told, hey, you need to go somewhere else.
I want you to walk down that. Can you walk down that thought process?
We've talked about, I think we even made a video about this, about, anytime that, I'm not saying not to refer people out, definitely want to make that known. And I will also say I very rarely refer anybody out. And one of the main reasons is because when you start to break down like, oh, this person connected with me, we had a human connection. And then I say at the end of it, hey, we got to get you somewhere else. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, I really like talking with you. I disclosed some things. Like, I haven't told anybody this before. It's like, yeah, but we got to get you going to somewhere else. What is going to then happen with that is that the patient most likely isn't going to go there anyway, but they're not going to think about coming back to the BHC that's in the primary care clinic. And they might go back to the PCP, and the PCP will ask them, hey, how was that? And they're like, yeah, it was all right.
So walk that scenario out. Happens 3 or 4 times where a patient loves Dr. Bauman and they want to see you. And they're told after the 3rd visit, or maybe we do visit limits after the 4th visit.
Yeah, you got to go somewhere else.
You have to go somewhere else. The PCP is like, oh, okay, yeah, and then they explain our model and say, well, yeah, mostly we want to get people 1 to 4 visits. And then it happens again. And the PCP is still game, they're still happy that you're there. And they explain it, and the patients, they calm them down. They're like, okay. And then it happens a 3rd time. Then it happens a 4th time. I don't know at what time the PCP is like, I could meet with somebody, help them a little bit, and then refer them out. So what do I need you for?
I can actually just skip this step. That actually adds maybe a little bit more work to what I'm doing throughout the day. And then this starts to ripple out to us getting back to the thing about metrics, where visits start to come down, handoffs start to go down, all these different things start to, again, it's like, what is going on right now?
So I would rather set up our system, we play it by the metrics, and we keep an eye on all these metrics. And you're going to have some more scheduled slots because you have to be able to meet the demands of again, we just broke down the number scenario. We have to play that numbers game. And so if you're in your system and you're like, I don't know how am I going to still be available for handoffs and still see all these patients, and then you feel like you're the one who's doing something wrong and all these things. Jeff Ryder, I'm going to steal this from him. He said once that if folks are kind of going through all this and they're getting really frustrated and visit limits, that's just means you need another BHC.
Right.
And so I have all kinds of empathy for those systems. Well, what if they're brand new? What if they're in the middle of nowhere and they can't get they're not a big city where you could just say, oh, hey, come on board. And we also know how hard it is and how long it could take to onboard somebody. So systems are looking at that and they're just like, gosh, add another person. And then if you're looking at the numbers, and this is where it comes full circle, because people always think that I'm on their side. And then I'm like, no, I'm on no one's side. I'm on the primary care side. that's why if you're only seeing 6 patients a day, 5 patients a day, 4 patients a day, and you're going to your one-up, your supervisor, and you're saying that you need more, you need a teammate. We need to hire more. And they go and they look, and there's, and especially if they're at a 4-day 80% time and they're at 6, they're not going to be able to make any type of argument to get another BHC added.
Right.
So that 8 or 9 a day, depending on the context that you're in, it's good for so many things, some of which is financial, but it's not financial for financial sake. It's for finances so that somebody can make an argument financially that it's viable to add another BHC. So everything is interconnected. I know we're like a little bit out there in the universe right now, but I promise these things are all interrelated. And it's not just, if you want to get your warm handoffs up, what I hear often is, well, you just block their clinic and you do warm handoffs only. What do we know about handoffs?
Well,
when they come in?
We can't predict them at all, and I think that's the other thing too, is that, as you were saying before, we have to ask ourselves, why is a handoff a good thing? You know, it's one of these things that say you block a schedule for handoffs only, right? And say a whole day, we'll just say hypothetically, and maybe you get 5 handoffs. That's pretty good.
That's really good.
Right? That's pretty good. Say on average you get 4, right? We'll just say on average you get 4 handoffs per day. It's a block schedule. What if someone calls in? What if someone calls in that day and they need to get seen? Can they get in to see you that day? Or is it kind of like, hey, you have to schedule with the PCP, then do a handoff to the BHC?
Oh,
you know?
I would definitely recommend against that.
Well, the whole point would be to recommend against blocking people for handoffs completely, because there's nothing inherently good about a handoff. The whole idea of why a handoff is so important is because it's access. Someone calling in,
team-based, it's access.
It's team-based, it's access. Someone calling in, though, to the front desk and be like, hey, I need to get into an appointment. That is just access as well. That's just as important. So I think the other thing that we need to watch is that, yes, one of my favorite numbers and metrics, is why we report it out as the second metric outside of visits, is handoffs. I think it's a really good thing because it reflects access and all these different things. And we got to be intentional and careful, though, to not carry it to the forefront. It's like handoffs are the best thing just indiscriminately. I think handoffs are great in many, many contexts, but if people can't get in or people can't come back to see you to get back in, then handoffs start to become a little bit less...
yeah, because then if you're just seeing everybody one and done...
Correct.
And we know the math, that the majority, the most common scenario is that somebody's going to see somebody once. We know that. That's the most common scenario. But even mathematically, if you shake it out, there's still a huge number of people that's not going to fall into.
And I love that you did break that down math-wise, that there's just a huge number of people that are going to come back. It's not the majority. It's not the most common scenario. It's still a lot of people, though, that are going to come back.
Yeah, and exactly what you said, that if somebody can't get a scheduled visit with you, because you're completely blocked for handoffs. And when you do that, when you block yourself completely for handoffs, you shoot yourself in the foot in so many ways. The productivity to be able to reach 8-9 patients a day, if you're relying only on warm handoffs, is impossible at baseline.
I would say it's impossible. I would say it's just not going to happen, because, as you were saying, when you play the system out, it will break down, because people will want to come back. And if they can't come back, they're going to tell their PCP, wasn't a helpful service. That's going to drive down handoffs. It will break down.
Yeah, and even if you had a great system, just to get 12 handoffs in a day, or 10 or 8 on a regular basis, what else do we know about handoffs? Do they come at regular times?
Right.
So we've had folks, and I say this again with no frustration in my heart, but we've had a lot of medical residents over the years that say, Dr. Beachy, you're in charge of these things. Why don't you just have it to where there's a designated BHC for handoffs only? And I said, because there's going to be a lot of wasted dead time, and handoffs never come in on a regular basis. So even if you did have somebody designated as warm handoffs only, the chances that 2 handoffs aren't going to come in within a few minutes of another. So then you're just going to be just that much more frustrated. At least if you have everybody doing scheduled visits and warm handoffs in between on this cadence, that you're going to, because think about it that way. Imagine if you were blocked for handoffs all day and none came from 8 a.m. to 9:15, which tends to be a slower time. And the PCPs are running around like crazy, and you're just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. So then you scrub with them, and you tell them all the patients that they can see, and now you get 2 at once, and you have to tell the other one, sorry, I can't do it.
100%, 100%. And that's where you can see how these things just start to go. So as we wrap up, as we come back to the metric kind of conversation.
I know, we took us on a little venture there.
So the thing I would hope that people would, and please, as you read the data dump, reach out, email us with questions about how we track these things. What does it mean? I think those are all great things. And as we said, the main reason I would say that we put this data out is to encourage more and more people, having CFHA be that place that a free-flowing amount of information can go to researchers, can come from clinicians, just so we can get this out into the universe more. Rather than like these PCBH fidelity metrics and these what are people doing just being almost like hidden, and then like maybe at a conference you hear some of these things. It's like the importance of tracking data and sharing it. That's good.
And then, and if also in summary, that if you're going to start somewhere, visits per, instead of saying a day, I'd say per 8-hour period.
Yeah.
Getting because you don't want to just look at it indiscriminately. And if somebody's on PTO, you wouldn't want to. I know a lot of systems, and again, I think it's because they're newer and they're trying to get the data analysts and get all the reports. But if you only do a monthly basis, that's not granular enough, because if somebody is gone for 2 weeks of PTO, it's going to look like, oh, well, I'm going to just make up some numbers. We had 100 visits in November, and then I only had 50 visits in December.
Well, we run into that with like December as a month anyway, right? Or November, because they have 2 holidays. Automatically they're out. So November and December are going to be usually just total visit-wise lower for the team than other months.
Yeah, and if they took PTO or whatever. So you have to have like per 8 hours that they worked in clinic.
That's great.
How many patients have they seen? So when you do the patients per, you need to be very clear, patients per, and then outline that accordingly. And that's a great place to start, followed by warm handoffs per day, followed by unique patients.
Yeah.
Absolutely is a great place to start. But, there is a lot of nuance to this if you haven't been able to ascertain that.
And I would also say even probably the best place to start is know your values, right? Know what your values are, know what's kind of driving and what you want the program to be about and to reflect. And then, as we've always talked about, reverse engineer that value to be reflected in data. And that's where, for us, visits per day or visits per an 8-hour clinic, handoffs per 8 hour, and then the unique patients is the place.
Well, we appreciate it. If you've made it this far in the corner, I hope that you found it to be helpful and valuable. I hope that maybe it even, conjured up some questions that you didn't even have before. But don't hesitate to reach out, because if you have that question, as we always say, somebody else might have that question, and it could be fodder for another PCBH Corner.
And I'm glad that our makeshift camera stand worked out. But as always, thanks for stopping by. Let us know where your mind goes.